My opinion, she would still be a waitress if it wasn't for Dad.
I do believe because there are no delivery certificates.
And people would always ask me when I worked there, like, okay, like what stories are real? And I'd be like, okay, every story is real except for the ones about the royal family. And this was prior to Meghan Markle coming on. I'm like, the palace is just a tight ship.
What you're about to hear was never approved for an open hearing. And once you hear it, there's no going back. Because according to Sarah Ferguson, Duchess of York, where Meghan Markle grew up, has a chapter that was never meant to be told publicly. Not debated, not speculated. A section that didn't begin with Prince Harry or the palace gates, but they are far out in open water. From cameras and aboard Prince Andrew's yacht. And this is where everything comes to a head serious. Sarah Ferguson doesn't just make claims. She alleges something far more dangerous. That she possesses private materials, never intended to be read letters, recordings that were never intended to be heard, moments that cannot be duplicated easily, denied, or dismissed. Pieces of the past that still exist, waiting. She said that Meghan wasn't just present in Andrew's world. She played a part in it. One described using a phrase so unsettling it reframes everything that followed, his first client. If that is the case, even in part, the narrative that we have all not been informed of Meghan's rise just it collapses. And currently, Sarah Ferguson is announcing plans to publish a book that reveals every secret about Meghan Markle. Guys, when you know what comes next, nothing about everything you know will look the same again. There are words that suggest scandal, and then there are phrases that convey intention. Sarah Ferguson's description Meghan Markle as Prince Andrew's first client, she did not select that dialect by mistake. This wasn't the vocabulary of gossip. It wasn't the language of romance. It was well thought out and unsettling. A client is not someone who stumbles into a situation by chance. A client implies arrangement, understanding, expectation. It implies that a transaction was taking place, even if the details were never written down or uttered out loud in public. That single phrase debunks the notion that Meghan's early proximity to Andrew was innocent or accidental. It reframes her presence on those yachts as purposeful, structured, known. According to Sarah's account, Meghan wasn't simply invited as a guest tagging along for a party. She was someone Andrew first noticed, someone he had a private relationship with, someone whose role went beyond social pleasantries. And this is where the story takes a sharp turn. Because if Andrew's first client was Meghan, it suggests that a pattern has begun, not merely for Andrew but also for Meghan herself. A moment where access, intimacy, and the chance to do so quietly intersected. For Harry, this phrase would have landed like a punch to the chest. He had spent years in the open separating himself from Andrew, rejecting his uncle's every move represented. And now the woman he married, the woman he defended against the world, was being described using language that directly connected her to that same dark orbit. This went beyond uncomfortable, it was destabilizing. Memory can be challenged, motives can be questioned, but physical evidence changes the temperature of a story entirely. As stated by Sarah Ferguson, this is where things became impossible to ignore. She claims to have come across letters, private correspondence that tied Meghan directly to Andrew's yacht days. These were not formal notes or polite exchanges. They were intimate, familiar, written with a tone that suggested a shared history and intimacy. Handwriting mattered. References also did. The letters, as Sarah describes them, included details that only someone who had been present would know, moments, jokes, mentions of places on board that were hidden from casual guests. This wasn't the language of strangers, and when Sarah read them, the meaning was clear enough that she didn't dismiss them as coincidence or misunderstanding. She understood what they stood for, proof that the connection she remembered had only ever existed in her memory. For those letters went unread for years. The public held, weighed, feared. Because when paper speaks, it also plays music, does not take a stance. It just exists. And with those letters, the story crossed a line. It moved from what someone claimed to have observed what said they could hold in their hands. And yet, even letters leave room for denial. It can be questioned. pages can be questioned. But voices change everything, including music, and once those entered the picture, the story was no longer drifting quietly at sea. It was heading straight toward impact. According to Sarah Ferguson, what finally ended the appearance of deniability were recordings, not descriptions, not recollections. Actual conversations that were recorded were never meant to exist beyond the moment they were spoken. She claims these recordings captured the conversations that Prince Andrew and Meghan Markle during those yacht days. Conversations that sounded relaxed, familiar, unguarded. The kind of tone people use only when they believe no one else is listening. This is where the story crossed its point of no return. A voice carries personality, rhythm, and music emotion. It cannot be separated from the person who owns it. And for Prince Harry, the idea that his wife's voice could exist in private conversation with the uncle he despised would have been unbearable. Because once you hear something like that, you don't just hear sound, you hear history rearranging itself. The presence of recordings meant this story was no longer theoretical. It had ceased to base on one's beliefs. It became something that could surface at any something that could be played for a moment, replayed, and recognized. Also, that knowledge alone was enough to destabilize everything. No one paid a higher emotional cost for these allegations than Prince Harry. Harry's entire adult identity has been shaped by rejection of royal hypocrisy, rejection of secrecy, rejection of the man at the center of everything of this story. He demonstrated that he wanted nothing to do with Andrew. He drew lines. He spoke out. He walked away. And right now, as per these claims, the past had crossed those lines. Without his knowledge, consider the conflict that led to the creation of Harry defended against the world. He's the uncle worked tirelessly to distance himself from. Suddenly tied together by a history he never saw coming. This wasn't just jealousy. It wasn't pride. It was humiliation layered on top of loyalty. Because Harry didn't just love Meghan. He centered his entire public conflict on her innocence. He positioned himself as her shield. And shields crack when they're built on stories that may not be complete. According to accounts tied to this fallout, Harry withdrew. He oscillated between anger and doubt, between requesting explanations and remaining steadfast in denial. Because accepting the possibility meant facing something significantly worse than betrayal required facing the idea that he may have been the last chapter in a story that had a long beginning before him. Inside the royal family, silence is never accidental. When their claims began circulating within inner circles, there was no immediate denial, no firm rebuttal, and no public correction. Instead, hushed gatherings took place behind closed doors, phone calls that never produced statements. The palace knew what was at stake. The Prince Andrew scandals had already wounded the monarchy deeply. A woman to tie Meghan up who publicly challenged the institution directly to Andrew's private world was not just embarrassing, it was catastrophic. And so, the royal response was not confrontation, it was containment. Silence became strategy because acknowledging the story risked validating it. It was at risk to deny provocative evidence. And proof, according to Sarah Ferguson, existed in forms the palace could not control. Behind the scenes, fear replaced confidence, not the headlines, but rather what else could occur if this thread were pulled any further. The monarchy has weathered a lot of storms. But this one threatened to connect too many gloomy sections at once in the music, and that is why no one rushed to speak. This was not a narrative that Sarah Ferguson rushed to tell. In fact, she stayed silent for decades. But when she finally spoke, she made no hints. She did not recommend it. She made a direct claim. On Prince, Meghan had multiple encounters. Andrew's yachts, and those encounters were not accidental. If this is true, adds more than just a footnote to Meghan's past. It changes the beginning point of her royal journey entirely. And for Harry, a man who's spent his life separating himself from the shadow cast by Andrew, the implications were devastating because secrets hurt more when they involve the people you trust the most. The yacht is not just a setting in the story. This is the foundation. According to Fergie, Andrew's yachts were designed for one purpose above all else: privacy. Out at sea, away from press, away from witnesses, away from accountability. the usual rules didn't apply. Titles blurred, boundaries softened, and what happened on board stayed on board. These were not casual day trips. They were recurring retreats, carefully chosen environments in which powerful individuals could relax without the worry of being seen. Champagne flowed, conversations loosened, and relationships began to dissolve from public eyes. According to Sarah Ferguson, Meghan was not a stranger to this world. She wasn't someone who wandered into it once by chance. She was someone who returned, someone who became familiar, someone who understood how that floating world operated. This is why the yacht matters, because it explains how proximity was possible, how repetition took place, as did the music, and how within royal, a future duchess could exist long before the public ever knew about them her name. And once that door opens, the story doesn't get any slower. Because what comes next isn't about rumor or memory. It involves language, intention, and phrase that changes everything. His first client. In the end, the most unsettling part of this story is not what has been revealed, it's what hasn't. According to Sarah, someplace Ferguson, there are still letters from the public has never read. Recordings still exist that the world has never heard, evidence that has not yet been made public, because it lacks power, but because it holds too much. And at the center of it all is that yacht. A ship that once floated quietly across open water, carrying secrets, laughter, and moments that no one else thought would matter years later. A location where reputations were unprotected, where intentions were spoken of, where history took a turn without anyone realizing it. Prince Harry believed he escaped the past when he left the palace. But the past doesn't respect distance. It waits. It reappears. And sometimes it returns with names you never expected to hear spoken together. Whether these claims are ever fully exposed or remain locked away, one truth is indisputable. The story Meghan told the world may not have begun where we were led to believe. Also, if that yacht could speak, if its polished decks and quiet cabins could tell their story, this would not be the end. It would only be the beginning. Because ghosts don't disappear when you leave them behind.